White,
Present.
Mr. Case,
Here.
Mr. Cook,
Here.
Mr. Johnson,
Present.
Mr. Laybourne,
Excused.
Mr. Luna,
Here.
Mayor Orr,
Here.
Dr. Rennie.
He's excused. He'll be here later. Okay. All right, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge
allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Consent agenda. All agenda items listed with the designation of CA are considered to be routine items by the governing body and will be enacted by one motion. There will be no separate discussion on these items unless a member of the governing body so requests and support by two other members is received. Any item removed from the consent agenda will be heard in its normal sequence on the agenda.
Thank you. Are there any items that any member wishes to have removed from the consent agenda? Any items to be removed? Okay, hearing none. Do I need a motion on that one? You said to pull them off. Okay, a motion to approve the consent agenda.
So moved.
Moved by Mr. Weibel, seconded by Mr. White. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That passes.
Next item is number 6, vouchers.
Madam Mayor,
Mr. Weibel.
I do have a conflict.
Okay. As he leaves the room, are there any items that any member wishes to discuss from the public? Any discussion from the public? Okay, seeing none, do I have a motion to approve?
So moved. Second.
Moved by Mr. Luna, seconded by Mr. Cook. Discussion by council? Discussion by council. Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of the vouchers, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That motion passes.
Public hearing for a restaurant liquor license application filed with the City Clerk's Office for the Ridge Restaurant Limited Liability Company, doing business as the Ridge Restaurant, 1820 Ridge Road, Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Is there any discussion from the public on this matter? Any discussion from the public? Okay, hearing none, this item is referred to Finance Committee. Oh, I suppose council gets to comment. Any comments from council on this? Comments from council? Okay, hearing none, it still goes to Finance. Question.
Thank you.
Public hearing to receive public comments on a proposed trade of a portion of real property owned by the City of Cheyenne at 2303 Westland Road for a portion of real property owned by Roger E. Gill and Alec Yergildovich, I think, at 2305 Westland Road, Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Is there any discussion by the public on this matter? Mr. Studley. Staff comment.
Jack Studley, City Surveyor. Madam Mayor and Council, this will be the third acquisition of land over on Crow Creek, immediately west of Westland Road. The appraisals have been completed, and the negotiations are before you with this proposed land exchange agreement. The amounts are within $1,000 of one another in order to meet the statutory requirement of being reasonably close. And then, in addition to that, there's a provision in this contract to provide a $5,000 incentive to have the landowners, once they acquire the city property, to demolish the building, the structure that is on there. Because once we lose ownership, we lose control of that. And so this will complete the program that we have been working on for a little over a year now. So with that, if you have any questions, I'll remain available.
Other questions for Mr. Studley? Questions? All right, thank you. Any other discussion by the public? Further discussion by the public? Hearing none. Discussion by council? Discussion by council. Goes on. All right. All right. The purposes of the public hearing have been met.
Public hearing to receive public comment and input on the development plan for the Hines Hole H2 project as proposed by the Cheyenne Downtown Development Authority.
Thank you. Is there discussion by the public on this one?
Good evening, Madam Mayor, Council. I'm Vicki Duggar, Executive Director of the Cheyenne Downtown Development Authority. And we hope to see Council's support for the development plan, as it is kind of the hand-in-glove piece that goes along with the resolution. It's gone through the Planning Commission and passed, and will go to Public Services Committee next week. So we feel like under Wyoming state statutes, this is kind of the plan for the plan, but it meets state regulatory requirements for what it needs to contain. It really talks about how it's part of our strategic plan, what the vision is, what the project is, how it'll lay out, how council will be very involved, and a very rigorous vetting process for technical review and community review as we move forward with qualified proposals. So we would just ask that council support and help move this project forward. And I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there any questions by council for Ms. Duggar? Questions? Okay. Is there other further public comment?
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Councilman. I'm Chuck West. I live at 422 Stampede Circle out of the DDA district in Ward 2. I'm a member of the City Board of Adjustment and the Brownfield Development Loan Committee, as well as a commercial real estate broker with over 40 years of development, management, and commercial sales and exchange experience. I've been a certified commercial investment member since 1978. I was asked to be part of the development planning group for the Heinz Hole by Councilman Roybal as an unpaid real estate advisor. The group started meeting in March of this year and included the executive director of the DDA, who just heard speak, DDA board member, the CEO of Leeds, Randy Bruns, who you all know, the Ward 1 councilman, of whom 2 actively participated, and myself. I would like to thank the mayor for her appointees to the DDA board and to the council for affirming them. All have development experience and many own property within the DDA district as required by statute. The DDA board has hired an executive director, Vicki Duggar, who has served in similar capacities in other major cities with involvement in 55 development projects similar to the one being proposed. Vicki is well acquainted with the powers of the DDA as enumerated in Title 15, Chapter 9 of the Wyoming State Statute governing those powers. I believe she is determined to eliminate DDA debasement and put the D for development into the Downtown Development Agency's agenda. The DDA and the H2 committee members, with the city's assistance, have the experience and expertise to see these 2 properties brought into reuse after decades of non-use, hurting the tax base of Cheyenne and other downtown businesses. I urge your aye vote on the resolution and the plan before you.
Thank you. Are there questions for Mr. West? Questions for Mr. West? Okay, further public comment.
I'm John Volk, 6670 Red Cloud Trail. I have 2 specific issues to explain in my views. Number one is and I'm obviously, we are property owners in downtown, the DDA district. We've been strong supporters for the downtown, but unfortunately, and you're probably not going to like what I'm going to say tonight, but I'm going to put the cards on the table. I see a pattern here which, unfortunately, in my views, is the wrong path that I see the city going down. Now, our building on 18th Street, we spent $1,800,000 on that building. We finished it last year. There's another building next door. We spent over $300,000. And we are like a lot of other property owners in this city and downtown, who have taken the responsibility to maintain our properties and upgrade them, and not stand out with our hand in the air or our palm up waiting for the government to give us money. The pattern I see is I see out-of-town developers or property owners acquire property in the city, and they either make very, very poor business decisions or don't have the financial wherewithal to complete what they start. And then they turn around and they want the city, the state, and the county, DDA, you name it, to bail them out. And it's an absolute insult to all the property owners within this community that have done just the opposite. Now, secondly, I'm going to give you the history of the Heinz building. And I'll go back in the 70s when the Boyd building was acquired by Pete and Bill Cook. Our firm went to them and we leased the building. They remodeled the building. Bought the building for $65,000. Remodeled the building from top to bottom. We leased it up. Several years later, probably 4 or 5 years later, they condoed the building and sold it off. They then asked me to contact the owner of the Heinz building. They wanted to do the same thing there. My wife's from Illinois, and the owner of the building at that time was a guy by the name of Osmondson, somehow related to Nellie Heinz. I forgot. It's been too many years. And I was back there, and my wife and I went to this little town where he lived. I won't bore you with a lot of details, but he had a house on a hill, biggest house in town, this little town on the Mississippi River. And I tried and talked till I was blue in the face, but I could not get him to give us a price. So later on, after he was gone, the property was acquired by two gentlemen in Cheyenne for around $80,000. They then sold it to Al Wiederspun. Al had the building, spent quite a bit of money on the basement, redoing the boiler. The flood occurred in 1985. It's the only flood we've ever had in Cheyenne since then, downtown, I might add. We'll leave that alone. But anyway, so it took out everything, all the money he spent. He then sold the building, and I'm not, the dates were probably, maybe it was 25, 28, something like that. Sold the building to the gentleman from Steamboat for $1,300,000. Blew my mind. He never came forth or did what he said he was going to do with the property. For whatever reason, it doesn't make any difference, it's history. Then he turns around and sells it to the current owner for $1 million, let's say $1.6 million. I might be off, maybe it's a little bit more. And he has plans and had the tenant. And what I don't see on this table in front of you or in your file, there was at least 4 bids obtained by him and his group. I mean, it wasn't just him by himself, to renovate the building. Now, they were $8 to $10 million back then. That was several years ago. It didn't happen. Why, I don't know. I wasn't part of it. But I can tell you, if you start off at that kind of a price and then think you're going to spend $8 to $10 million or more. Now, that building has, as you probably know, if those of you who've been in the building, has a lot of limitations, has a lot of obstacles to overcome. Low ceilings. And even if you take into consideration the historic credits that you get if you restore the building, you get tax credits, and they're substantial. But that also costs you a great deal of money to maintain that historic features of the building. So it didn't happen. I know for a fact because I talked to Holland and Hart, his #1 tenant that was going to go in there, and it didn't happen. They didn't move in. So now here we are, and the amount of money you're talking about tonight is peanuts. It really doesn't make any difference. I think, in my personal opinion, as a developer and a realtor for all my life, that if you think that you're going to go out on a national search, I mean, the DDA is now going to be, they're going to play the role of a realtor, a marketing guru, and they're going to go out and try to find somebody to come to this town and spend, what's the price on the building? I've asked and asked and asked. I said, what is the price? 2.2, we'll come down, we'll do better than that. The price ought to be zero. Zero. Because that's all it's worth. They ought to donate the building to the city, and maybe you can find a way to get somebody to take that project on. But you've got to find the tenants, and you've got to, have the financial wherewithal in order to put this together. So the horses are not only out of the barn, they're bolted. And to think that you're going to, I'm going to put, okay, we're going to have $750,000 here for the angel coming from heaven that's going to come in and take this property over. It's not, you're going, I think, cart's in front of the horse. It's not the way you should be trying to do this. So, I knew, every time I come up and speak, I always say, are there any questions? So there's hardly any other questions. So I'll ask the question that I think you're going to ask me. Well, what would you do, John, if you were sitting in my shoes? And the number one thing is you need to determine right now in writing what is the price on the building today. I mean, you can pass $750,000, but you can't go out and look for somebody. I mean, every local developer in this town, including myself, has looked at this property. I know the property backwards and forwards. And so, to think that you're going to start off with a huge number of a value is ludicrous. Do you have any questions? I don't mean to lecture you, but I did, and I watched everybody do this too many times.
Are there questions of Mr. Volk? Questions of Mr. Volk? I have one. And if you could please help and explain to me, you mentioned public dollar funds going to help private entities, and how, if you could explain to me how this possible investment would be different than the $15 million bridge that we are building that will essentially enhance private development and private business owners in the East area.
You're talking about Christensen.
Correct.
And I knew that was going to come up if I came up here. Well, I'm well aware. I'm happy to answer that question. It's the duty of this city to provide the transportation network throughout this city, wherever we need it. The major artery, the major road, it's not any different than Reiner Viaduct or Norris Viaduct or any 16th Street, Lincoln Way. It's not any different than Dell Range. We build them and we maintain them. It's our job to provide the transportation network. And if you're asking what we did, I have a letter that I can be happy to give you all from Mayor Pando. When the 900 acres that Leeds has out there on the east side of Cheyenne, okay, when they started out there, and Lowe's Distribution, when they come, and said, number one, we want to build Venture Drive right through the middle of our property. Who the hell wouldn't want that? They said, but we need you to give us the right-of-way. We met, and we gave the city the right-of-way. A month later, the city came to us, or Leeds, excuse me, but it was, you got to understand, this was Leeds, Cheyenne, and Laramie County. And all three came and they said, the BOPU requires that when you annex, not annex, it was when you develop where Lowe's is going to go, you have to extend your sewer and water to the furthest most point of your property, which meant going down Venture Drive. They were just stopping there at that intersection. So we wrote a letter to the BOPU and said, we're developing the south side, and we will do the sewer and water at our nickel. And then that satisfied the BOPU's requirement. We did that, and I got a letter from the mayor saying, thank you for your cooperation. And what I should have done, what I didn't do, I should have required a waiver of the development fees that the city requires when you do another filing. Similar to what the city did out here at Granite Peak when they got $5.5 million waived because they traded them the wetlands down there by the animal shelter. But we didn't do that. Hey, look, we were all scrambling to make something happen in Cheyenne. And we've been still waiting. That's been, Lowe's has been almost 20 years I've been waiting. So you ask what we did, that's what we did. To answer your question, your responsibility as this city is to build the roads and anything associated with it. That's your responsibility. Now, over in Saddle Ridge, we were forced to build Whitney Road. That cost Bill Edwards and I $1 million. We did that. We didn't ask this, we had to do it. So, it's kind of a two-edged sword here. I see just like your development over here on Missile Drive. You got a developer anybody that comes from out of town, all of a sudden the city and the state fall over themselves to help them build the infrastructure when it's been done before by everybody else. The Point's done all their own development. They haven't asked the city for any help. So that answers your question about what Christensen overpass. Sure, it benefits us, but it also benefits everybody. It's a gateway to the Cheyenne, East Cheyenne.
Absolutely. That does answer my question, and certainly.
But as far as the development downtown, a property owner downtown, you handed them $750,000. I don't see any other property owners downtown or anywhere else in the city receiving that kind of money for building their own building or remodeling their own building. And it's a tough one. It's a tough one. I understand what you want to try to do down there, but when somebody makes a bad business decision, you fish or cut bait. They need to cut bait. They fished and they missed.
All right, thank you very much. Any other questions? Further public comment?
Hello, my name is Georgia Roswell. I am an artist in town. I am still on the Board of Lights On, and currently in the Heinz building. Yes, it is not vacant. There are 3 art-driven businesses there right now. My gallery partner at the Blue Door Arts is Terry Cruiser. Mike McIntosh is here with the Artist Collective, and Leanne Lively and Beverly are here with 3 Crows. So the Heinz is not empty. In fact, it has the lights on through creativity. So I would like to advocate today for what's that angel developer that's going to come in? Well, I think your best bet is someone who is involved with the creative sector. because that's the kind of developer that will come and look at buildings that everybody else thinks are weird or cannot be used and will turn it into something fabulous. And we have the opportunity very close by in the state of Colorado to see what's going on there with ArtSpace and some other entities. And I would like to read something from the website called Space to Create Colorado. And this is what it says. It's the first state-driven initiative for affordable housing for creative sector workers in the nation. Their mission is to develop affordable housing and workspace, including commercial space for creative industries and artisans, to position Colorado as the nation's leader in creatively led community transformation in rural communities. Space to Create will facilitate the development of 9 projects in 8 regions in Colorado's rural, small town, and mountain communities. The effort's led by Colorado Office of Economic Development, Colorado Creative Industries, the Colorado Department of Local Affairs, the Bachelor Foundation, History of Colorado, and ArtSpace, which leads me to my next point. This initiative was started in 2015. We also, and I don't know if any of you were there, we also had ArtSpace here in 2015. Tens of thousands of dollars were spent on surveys, and here we are in 2018. Colorado has pushed forward and has on their docket to put 9 of these kinds of communities into Colorado. What have we done? I don't see anything. And I would like to advocate for not letting the Heinz building just be some space that is offices or just the run-of-the-mill thing you always see. I think something like ArtSpace, who said yes to Cheyenne, is something that should be looked at again. And it's not about the fact that we're a small city. One of their eligibility snapshots is that their community has to be 50,000 population or less. So whatever happens here, there's a model in Colorado that we can look at for creative-led redevelopment of the Heinz. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions? Questions?
Any questions?
Thank you very much.
Madam Mayor,
Mr.
just a point of clarification, and I think it might help as we, as a lot of folks want to speak. What we're discussing right now is the public hearing for the development plan for the H2 project, correct? And then the actual vote on the resolution for the H2 project, which includes the amount up to $750,000. That's to be voted on item 14 of the agenda. That's correct?
That is correct, Mr. White. However, I believe so far everything has been relevant to the two. Mr. Dorr.
My name is Major Dorr. I lived in Cheyenne since 1947. I love the city. I paid taxes since 1947. I would like to think that the taxes I paid will be going to a just cause. Now, I have basically a hypothetical situation. I too live in a building that's 90 years old. I will be 90 in October. I don't do stairs very well. To get into the main level, I have a 3-level home, 12 rooms. To get into the main level, I go up 2 steps, and there's a platform, and I go up 3 more steps. I use handrails to get up. What would happen should I ask the city? Well, I've had 3 realtors out, and they tell me that it's a nice home, but it needs improvements. Instead of an old gravity furnace, it needs a new furnace, forced air with air conditioning. Between $10,000 and $15,000. What chance do I have of asking the city, give me $10,000 to $15,000 so I can upgrade my home, I can sell it, and get into a single level home. You know how thin the chances are? 0. Why should we bail out David Hatch for $750,000 to start with? That's just the beginning. That building has been vacant for 30 years. Heaven only knows what all's wrong with it. I've lived in my home. It's been constantly used for 90 years. I think it's misappropriation of public funds. I do not think we need to use taxpayers' money to bail out an individual that made a poor investment. I just don't think that's right. If you vote yes for it, I think you're not doing your job as a city official. I think you're letting the city down. We expect you to expend our monies properly. This is about as improper as anything you could ever come up with. It's almost as bad as the hole across the street. That is so stupid. But you did it anyway. You did it anyway. Please represent the city of Cheyenne, the residents of the city of Cheyenne, instead of yourselves. That's what you're paid to do, is represent us. You don't listen. Please start paying attention to us. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Dorr. Questions for Mr. Dorr? Further public comment?
Regarding what you just said.
I would urge the public that we really can't have public outbursts. I do want to keep this under control. Mr. Cole.
Yes, Madam Council. Frank Cole. In about 1979, I was looking for a tax-free exchange for property as we sold the land for Frontier Mall. I looked all over. I went as far away as Dallas trying to find something. But one of the things I looked at first, right here, was the Heinz building. I thought it'd be a good one. I walked in there. I could not figure out how in the world to do air conditioning economically. I got my air conditioning contractor, and we went through the building, and he could not put it on less a chiller, which was way too expensive for that size of building. I was looking to offer about $150,000 for it. And this was after Pete Cook had looked at it. Well, after I finished looking at it, Pete caught me one day, and he says, "I hear you looked at the Heinz building." I said, "Yes." And I walked, because I couldn't figure out how to air condition. He said, "That's exactly why I walked." That is the main problem with that building. And selling it for $2 million isn't going to solve that problem. I do not think it's a good investment for the city to try to even do it. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions of Mr. Cole? Okay, hearing none. Further public comment? Public comment?
I'm Dick Mason. I live at 6102 Cary Avenue. Some of you might recall my house as being the Christmas house a few years ago. One of the things that's come to my mind, and I think it's Economics 101, it was discovered by council a few weeks or months ago that there's still substantial debt on the Jack Spiker parking garage. To me, Economics 101 says take that $750,000, apply it to the indebtedness on that building, let the owner of the Heinz building take advantage of that parking garage like all the rest of us do, pay for it, and that will also help subsidize the retirement of that debt on the Spiker parking garage. Quite obviously, I'm opposed to giving this flim-flam man any more money.
Further public discussion? Further public discussion? If not, okay. Okay. Sorry, I didn't see out of the corner. Okay.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. I'm Terry Cruiser, and I'm a resident of the county at 8453 Surrey Road, and I am a local artist and craftswoman, and I'm one of the people that are occupying the Heinz Building and have been in there since October of this last year. We were in the front corner, the south end, myself and 5 other artists, and then come March, we decided we would move into the entire building. It was part of my initiative. Georgia and I moved into the Blue Door Arts, that is in the middle of the Heinz Building. We're right across from the Paramount. And then the Three Crows moved into the alley space that they were in prior to that before. My comment here tonight to you all is I'm not opposed at all to the Heinz Building. And I can go back and even bring up older history when, before I worked for the State Museum as their state art curator, the State Museum was trying to develop the Heinz into the State Museum and also make the UP Depot, this is before the development, into a transportation museum. And that is at the end of the 1980s. So I do know a lot of the history also as what has taken place with the Heinz. One of the reasons I decided to get into the Heinz and make an investment, most of our business, I will say, is due to out-of-town tourists that are coming through. And we have sold quite a bit of art. But I will also say that the cost of being in there and renting the building, the work that we did on it, is an investment. And the reason for me it is an investment is I always believe that the Heinz should be done something cultural, that there is such potential. And when the DDA, and I'm trying to think who else put the money behind, Art Cheyenne put the money behind bringing in art space to give some input as to what could be done in Cheyenne to do an art space. The Heinz always was one of my considerations. Also the fact that the Lights On had been in there for years and years. And as Georgia told you, her and I have continued. We now have the nonprofit of the Lights On. And it is my contention that if we can maintain being tenants in there, that we will apply for grants, because I don't know whether a lot of you would be aware that the windows, in fact, that were put in the Heinz Building were done under monies that were done through Lights On, and one major grant was at least $50,000 from the Wyoming Cultural Trust. So my feeling is on this, and this is what I'm advocating, is rather than the development of the Heinz, and I'm not opposed to what you're doing, my opposition is that it should not be developer driven. I feel that there are enough studies, there are talent within the community. The DDA has a long history of what could be done, I'm sure, in Cheyenne. I feel that we should put it towards a cultural institution there in development. I feel that if you were to invest and decide that it is something that Cheyenne needs, I don't feel that we need another restaurant in a building that does not have restaurant facilities when there are so many restaurants in other properties in downtown that are not even being utilized, that are vacant. I think an arts building with studio spaces, with living upstairs, I understand all the problems that there are, but with the Lights On history of receiving over $100,000 of funding already put in within the last decade, I believe that we could get federal funding through the National Endowment on the Arts to assist with doing an art space. It would take a long term. You would have to phase this thing out, but it would be giving something to the community, to the tourists that come through, and it would not be developer driven. That is my problem with it. I feel that Cheyenne should be determining what would add to Cheyenne, what would spur other development, and the same thing with the whole. I'm in opposition to it becoming a parking lot. I think given the work that's being done over on the west edge with that innovative architecture structure utilizing the shipping containers, I think that is an idea where we could push that and something along those lines, a very modern, visually very appealing structure that enhances the art space there of the Heinz. And I guess that is pretty much all I have to say, except I do know there is an investor through Art Cheyenne that has been looking at buildings and a significant amount of money. So I think there are avenues out there if you would utilize the arts community. And we are strong. We've been around a long, long time. I, in fact, have commissions that I did for the city of Cheyenne. So though a lot of you may not know me, but I have been around and have done public artworks. So I believe I speak from a place of knowledge and wisdom and longevity, and also from a place of wanting something to be done for Cheyenne that we do not have. Most of the other communities in the state of Wyoming, the other towns, all have art centers, and they all receive money through the Wyoming Arts Council. The Heinz Building received money through the Wyoming Arts Council. Cheyenne, the capital city, does not have a major art center. And for my money and for the little bit of time I have left on this earth, I would give you everything that I have in terms of input, work, talent, whatever you need, if this is something that we could realize together in terms of development of the Heinz. Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Are there questions of council? Thank you very much. Good evening.
Hopefully I'm the last speaker. Don Edmonds, 7309 East Pershing. I have kind of a unique history with the Heinz Building and the WRO. Anybody here remembers what the WRO is? But the thing about it is, I have done security on both buildings, and they're a trip. Once you get into them, they were a real trip. As a matter of fact, when the WRO burnt down, I gave the fire department blueprints for the floors that I had drawn when I was doing security in there so we wouldn't fall through holes in the floors, and gave those to the fire department so they wouldn't fall through the same holes. I kind of agree with some of the past speakers in here. I think putting $750,000 against doing this for the Heinz Building is going to cost the city in the long run. Number one, you have a project that you're doing right now just across here called the Commons that you just had your contractor come up and needed $450,000 more because they ran into problems. What's going to happen if he runs into something more? You know, the thing about it is that you just can't go out and just throw money at projects and expect them to get done. You have a number of projects that are going to be way underfunded. One of them, unfortunately, is going to be Christensen Road. That's going to be way underfunded. And you're going to have some other projects out there. You know, the Commons here is going to be having problems. So I think it's time for the City Council just to kind of look at what you're going out and what you're spending your money on, cinch your belts up a little bit, and act responsibly. The Heinz Building is not going to go anywhere.
Thank you. Questions? All right. Any other further public comment? Further public comments? Okay. Comments from council? No. All right. Hearing none, the purpose of this public hearing has been met.
Ordinance third reading, amending various chapters and sections contained within Title V, Business Licenses and Regulations of the Code of the City of Cheyenne, Wyoming, pertaining to notarization of applicant signatures.
Discussion by the public on this matter? Discussion by public? Hearing none, Mr. White.
Madam Mayor, the recommendation from the Finance Committee is to approve on third and final reading, and I so move.
Second.
Moved by Mr. White, seconded by Mr. Johnson. Discussion by council? Discussion by council. Hearing none, as this is an ordinance on third and final reading. Clerk, please call the roll.
Dr. Rennie?
Yes.
Mr. Roybal?
Yes.
Mr. White?
Yes.
Mr. Case?
Aye.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Luna?
Yes.
Mayor Orr?
Aye. Motion passes.
Ordinance third reading, amending various chapters and sections contained within Title V, Business Licenses and Regulations of the Code of the City, amending Section 5.12.140, Persons under the age of 21 years, Restrictions Provisions of Chapter 5.12, Alcoholic Liquor and Malt Beverages of the Code of the City of Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Thank you, sir. Discussion by the public on this matter. Discussion by the public. Hearing none, Mr. White.
Madam Mayor, the recommendation from the Finance Committee is to approve on third and final reading, and I so move.
Second.
Moved by Mr. White, seconded by Mr. Johnson. Discussion by council? Discussion by council. This is an ordinance on third and final reading. Clerk, please call the roll.
Mayor Orr?
Aye.
Dr. Rennie?
Yes.
Mr. Royball?
Yes.
Mr. White?
Yes.
Mr. Case?
Aye.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
Yes.
Mr. Luna?
Yes.
Motion passes.
Ordinance third reading pursuant to Section 2.2.1 zoning map amendments, Section 5.1.2 zoning districts established, and Section 5.1.3 official zoning map of the Unified Development Code, changing the zoning classification from MUB mixed-use business emphasis to CB community business for lots 1 and 2, Block 1, Simpson Estates, Cheyenne, Wyoming, located at the southwest corner of the intersection of College Drive and Cheyenne Street.
Discussion by the public on this matter. Discussion by public? Yeah, right there is fine, and please introduce yourself.
Yeah, good evening. My name is Ginger Brown with Coffee Engineering Surveying on behalf of the applicant Al Simpson and Clean Wheels LLC, the developer. We are proposing an express tunnel car wash at this site with this zoning application. And as the staff had recommended, to seek the CB zoning. Anyways, I'm here for questions.
Okay, are there any questions? Any further questions? All right, hearing none. Mr. Roybal.
Madam Mayor, the recommendation of the Public Services Committee is to approve on third and final reading, and I so move.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Roybal, seconded by Mr. Case. Discussion by council? Discussion by council. Okay, this is an ordinance on third and final reading. Clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Luna?
Yes.
Mayor Orr?
Aye.
Dr. Rennie?
Yes.
Mr. Royball?
Yes.
Mr. White?
Yes.
Mr. Case?
Aye.
Mr. Cook?
Yes.
Mr. Johnson?
No.
Motion passes with Mr. Johnson as a no.
Ordinance third reading pursuant to Section 2.2.1 zoning map amendments, Section 5.1.2 zoning districts established, and Section 5.1.3 official zoning map of the Unified Development Code, changing the zoning classification from MR medium density residential to MUB mixed use business emphasis for lots 1 through 5, Block 19, North Cheyenne, second filing, Cheyenne, Wyoming, located at the northwest corner of the intersection of Yellowstone Road and Prairie Hills Drive.
Thank you. Is there discussion by the public on this matter? Good evening. If you could introduce yourself.
Margaret.
Okay.
Okay, I'm against that, and I would like someone on the council to explain to me what mixed use exactly is.
Maybe we could have staff, if you wouldn't mind, Mr. Briggs, or somebody from staff, Susanna. Thank you.
Are you going to tell me?
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Susanna Montana, Planning and Development Department. I'm here in place of Seth Lloyd, who's the project manager, and he's having car trouble on the highway. Couldn't get here in time. The mixed-use zone would allow both residential and commercial development on this site. The applicant does intend to demolish the existing apartments. The current zoning is medium-density residential, and the proposed zoning would allow fourplex development and office and retail development on the property.
May I stop you one moment?
Thank you.
What is the ratio?
What?
Commercial compared to residential on mixed use?
To answer that question, Madam Mayor, members of the council, there is no particular ratio. The mixed-use district could allow wholly commercial or wholly residential.
Thank you very much. For the developer's discretion. Further comments?
Yes, I have a proposal. Did anyone on council read or look at what I proposed?
Yes,
yes or no?
I did.
Yes.
You did not.
Yes.
You did.
We're saying yes.
Okay.
Because I know it could easily have been ignored.
Correct. So this is about a zone change. It's up to the developers regarding how that is to be developed.
Don't you want public input on how that's going to get developed?
Yes.
That's why I'm here.
Okay.
My suggestion is for the tiny house concept
Yes, we're familiar with that.
Rather than strictly commercial.
Okay.
I saw all of the doctors' offices across the street. There aren't enough people to pay a surgeon for his services. There is not enough affordable housing. That's obvious. So that's what I am suggesting, rather than demolishing what was once a residential area. And allowing, not only that, let those who really want housing pay for it. With the tiny house concept, create low-income loans for low-income people, not $500,000, not $600,000. How about something reasonable for working poor people? Maybe $25,000, $35,000. Because that is what is facing America due to the loss of the middle class. So that is my proposal for that particular area.
Okay. Thank you very much for that. Appreciate it. Further public comment? Further public comment? Okay, hearing none. Mr. Roybal.
Madam Mayor, the recommendation of the Public Services Committee is to approve on third and final reading, and I so move.
Second.
Moved by Mr. Roybal, seconded by Mr. Case. Discussion by council. Further discussion by council? Okay, hearing none. As this is an ordinance on third and final reading, clerk, please call the roll.
Mr. Luna?
Yes.
Mayor Orr?
Aye.
Dr. Rennie?
Yes.
Mr. Roybal?
Yes.
Mr. White?
Yes.
Mr. Case?
Aye.
Mr. Cook?
No.
Mr. Johnson?
No.
Motion passes with Mr. Cook, and Mr. Johnson is no votes.
Ordinance second reading, amending section 8.40.070, food stands or push carts, mobile food trucks, mobile food units, temporary parade vendors, business license required application of chapter 8.40 food and food service establishments of title 8 health and safety of the code of the city of Cheyenne, Wyoming by creating a new section 8.40.070D, exempting lemonade stands operated by minors under the age of 18 years from the provisions of this section.
Oh, got it. Perfect. Thank you. Short-term memory. Okay, discussion by the public on this matter. Discussion by the public? Hearing none. Mr. White.
Madam Mayor, the recommendation from the Finance Committee is to approve on second reading, and I so move.
Second.
Moved by Mr. White, seconded by Mr. Luna.
Madam Mayor, I move to amend by substitute that reflects amendments approved at the July 2nd, 2018 Finance Committee meeting.
Second.
Moved and seconded. Discussions by the public. Mr. White, could you please, for the public's sake, just outline what those are?
Yes, ma'am. The substitute amendment involves moving the exemption from section 8.40.070, section D, to section 8.40.010, purpose D, and read as follows, quote, minors under the age of 18 years operating a beverage stand selling lemonade, iced tea, or similar beverages on property owned, leased, or rented by their parents or legal guardians are exempt from the provisions of this chapter.
Well done. Thank you very much. Discussion by council on the substitute amendment. Discussion by council?
Madam Mayor, just briefly.
Mr. Case.
I don't want to make a joke out of this, but I've been hearing that we're doing this because your administration and the police are out busting kids, and I want to make that very clear. That is not happening.
That's absolutely true. I think if the police officer is stopping by, they better be purchasing lemonade or Kool-Aid.
100%.
Okay. Further discussion by council. All right. Hearing none, we are voting on the substitute amendment. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? That passes. We're back on the main motion. Further discussion? Further discussion.
Are we on public again or council?
Public. Discussion by council then. Mr. Johnson.
Just the fact that I don't have any problem voting yes on this, but this chapter is probably going to have to be rewritten next year anyways, because the legislature has things working through the LSO to actually go through more than just lemonade stands in regards to minor merchants. And so there's no point in not voting yes on something clerical like this, but I just know that doing, basically paying for the public records to go into the newspaper for just a kind of a textual amendment on one specific section and then have to redo the entire thing next year, which all of this might be obsolete, just kind of seemed a little redundant.
Maybe we could sell some lemonade to pay for that newspaper. Further discussion by council? Further discussion? All right, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed? That motion passes.
Ordinance second reading, creating section 15.08.031, building permit fees, exceptions for incentivization program of chapter 15.08, International Building Code adopted, of Title 15, Buildings and Construction of the Code of the City of Cheyenne, Wyoming.
Thank you. Is there discussion by the public on this?
Good evening, Vicki Duggar, Cheyenne DDA. I am in support, DDA is in support of this incentive program. And for building permit fees, I'd just like to say that there were some questions about, is this fair to other developers, maybe who are outside the zone? And what I just want to say is studies have shown that within a central business district versus outside greenfield development, there's many times more property tax collected from higher density development than lower level development per acre comparison. And so when you incentivize compact development, you actually will get a higher return on your investment. Property taxes are higher. There's less money spent in providing services, even trash collection and police services. So we hope this can be adopted.
Thank you. Questions? All right. Further public discussion?
Thank you, Madam Mayor, members of council. Joe Patterson, Guardian Development Companies, 5306 Delrange Boulevard. First, I wanted to commend the authors of this ordinance for really thinking outside the box and coming up with a great way to incentivize some redevelopment. However, we're having a hard time and struggling a little bit supporting this ordinance because it is drawing a fine line and saying if you're on this side of the line, you qualify for a waiver of your building permit fees. And if you're on this side of the line, well, too bad. We have a project that is currently passed, and it's a 33-acre development, and we are required by the city to install a traffic signal at Van Buren and Delrange at our costs. We're also required to upgrade a utility system half a mile away from the entrance to our project for Board of Public Utilities. We're also required by the city to add improvements to a turn lane on College and Delrange Boulevard, 1 mile from the entrance to our subdivision. So we are being hit with these costs outside the scope of our development area, which is fine. We understand that, and it's part of our development. The other point I'd like to make is that the city building department is a self-funded entity. As hard as those employees work in that entity, they are shorthanded. They need more inspectors, they need more plan reviewers, they need more permit techs. You are taking permit fees away from an entity that regulates itself by collecting these fees. What could potentially happen with this is building permit fees across the city could potentially increase to pick up the impacts of additional inspections, plan reviews, whatever is required from this development. With that being said, I think there are other alternatives and creative ways to help revitalize downtown and make this incentive program maybe even a little better. And suggestions would be to look potentially at the Unified Development, the UDC, and maybe reducing some of the impact on parking requirements or landscaping requirements or things of that nature that make it very difficult to redevelop on an infill project. So as well as this kind of incentivizes, I don't think it's the right ordinance by waiving permit fees to an entity that is a self-funded entity and relies on those permit fees for its staffing and its employees. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions? Questions? Okay, hearing none. Further public discussion? Further public discussion? Okay, hearing none.
Madam Mayor.
Let's go to... Oh, Mr. Briggs, thank you.
Madam Mayor, members of the council, Robert Briggs, Planning and Development Director for the city. I just wanted to do two things really quickly, and one is, address some of the concerns that people do have about providing incentives to a geographic area. And then I also wanted to directly answer, there were two questions that came up in finance that I wanted to make sure that the council had answers to. Ms. Duggar already began to address the benefits of downtown development and the benefits of seeing investment in the downtown and that return. In 2011, actually, in December of 2011, Cheyenne hosted a real estate professional with expertise on downtown development, a gentleman named Joe Minicozy, and he actually went through both in Laramie County and Albany County some examples of the return on an investment when you talk about that density of development. And he went through a variety of different examples that showed that when you look at, for example, development on Del Range and the property tax return, and you compared that to the assessed value of properties in the downtown, that return was an order of magnitude of 8 to 10 times per acre. That was estimated. And so downtown development, and not only is that the core and the hub of the community, but it is, as was already spoken, it's a much more efficient form of development. And when you start talking about the impact fees and some of the additional dollars that we require of development on that suburban fringe, it's because in the downtown where we have the infrastructure built out, it's already anticipating that higher density and capacity. But when we see greenfield development, we need to offset the impact of that greenfield development on our existing system. And it's an unfortunate challenge that with the growth that we've seen, that some of our major transportation corridors are experiencing some traffic delays and problems, and we need to address those. Whereas in the downtown, you're on a grid system. It's built out. That infrastructure is already there. I wanted to also point out, and we got into this a little bit in finance, that when we looked at capping that program at $100,000, and we talked about that the revenues for the building department had been fairly conservatively estimated, and that what we were seeing is that we had repeated that estimated revenue of $1.9 million in permit fee revenues, and that we were actually exceeded that amount last year. We definitely exceeded it the preceding year with the capital project, and I'm hoping that we're on track to exceed it for this next year. So we budgeted for $1.9 million in revenue, and we've consistently seen revenue above that. And so we've tried our best to definitely, we know that the revenues that the building department brings in are very valuable. They also happen to bring in about twice at $1.9 million, they bring in about 1.5, 2 times the revenue that it takes to run that department. When you look at in terms of what they're budgeted. And so that's another thing to I think that's important to keep in mind and take into consideration. And then when we talk about some of the other ways that we can look at encouraging development in the downtown, when we talk about parking and landscaping requirements, the UDC already does have, when you talk about that central business district zoning, does have some slightly different requirements for parking and landscaping, and they take into account that kind of urban density and that urban context. I wanted to specifically answer the questions that were raised by the council. One question was asked was right now, how much in terms of fees do we collect within that project area? I took out, if you don't take out the large public projects, it is pretty sizable. Obviously in 2016, 2017 with the capital project, we took in, over $1.1 million in building permit fee revenue. And with the courthouse, the county courthouse remodeling in 17, 18, we took in about $190,000. When you take those projects out of the mix, we bring in about $140,000 to $150,000 within that project area. And entering into communication with some of the people that asked the question, and Councilman Case had asked the question at Finance, we're happy to, at the next Finance Committee meeting, bring some thoughts and some ideas for things that we might be able to do to further fine-tune this program. And then the question was also asked, were there any permits that were in the wings, so to speak, waiting that might want to take advantage of this program? And we got the answer to that question and drew that out. There are currently 5 permits that are within this area. 3 of them are sign permits, so they're not really kind of building redevelopment projects. One is a siding permit, and the other is a public facility. So it's a large public project. And so I'm happy to answer any questions that the council has about the proposal or anything else.
Questions for Mr. Briggs?
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Case.
Just briefly, and Mr. Briggs and I had a brief conversation prior to the meeting. I believe, and you mentioned a public project that is kind of in the wings, and perhaps one of the recommendations that you might be bringing forward is that we limit this to commercial private projects. Is that
certainly that's one option, to limit it to private projects. We have just talked about mixed use, so we can have the discussion about whether to limit it residential versus commercial. But I think that in some of the other examples that I've seen, some of the power in encouraging people to live downtown is these tenant finishes that you might see in downtown condos and in downtown residential opportunities.
Thank you.
Further questions from Mr. Briggs?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Johnson?
Just the one thing I think you left out that you covered in finance was the sunset clause.
I'm sorry?
About the sunset, that you covered the 100,000 cap, but the sunset you didn't really touch on.
That's correct. The ordinance is built into sunset June 30th of 2019. So if the council takes no further action, then this is not something that would continue and endure. It would sunset in a year.
Thank you. All right. Further questions of Mr. Briggs? Okay. Hearing none. Mr. White.
Madam Mayor, the recommendation from the Finance Committee is to approve on second reading, and I so move.
Second.
Moved by Mr. White, seconded by Mr. Johnson. Discussion by council.
2 points, Madam Mayor. Sorry.
Mr. White?
Yes. Just 2 points, and they were articulated by Councilman Johnson and Mr. Briggs. One of the reasons why I'm supporting this is the fact that it limits our potential risk to $100,000. And it's basically just a pilot project for a period of 1 year to see if it can spur some additional economic development in a dense, concentrated downtown area. I don't know that we've ever tried anything like this, and so I think it's worth the effort to see if it works. And if it doesn't, we can just let it die in a year.
All right. Thank you. Any other comments?
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Case.
I just want to address Mr. Patterson's comments and the kind of conversation I had with Mr. Briggs prior to this meeting addressed a lot of your concerns, and I would encourage you to attend either Finance next Monday, and we'll kind of be hashing through some of that stuff in the next week, so hopefully we can produce something that is a little more satisfying to those comments you made. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Any other comments by council? All right, hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed?
No.
Motion passes with Mr. Cook as a no.
Resolution supporting the expedient redevelopment of the building located at 1602 Capitol Avenue, Cheyenne, Wyoming, commonly referred to as the historic Heinz Building, and the lot adjacent to and west of the Heinz Building known as the Hole, postponed from June 25, 2018.
Thank you. We have heard quite a bit of public discussion on this. Is there anything further?
Madam Mayor, Vicki Duggar, Cheyenne DDA, and I spoke to the plan earlier. I want to speak to this resolution. It just seems to me like that there's some fear and there's some unknown, and that's okay. This is a different project. It's uncharted waters. DDA has been in business 34 years. This is really the first time that DDA is undertaking development powers in partnership with the city. But other communities actually do these kinds of projects all the time. So it's okay kind of to have those first time jitters. We're all in this together. I will say we have an amazing board, a great committee, a great H2 committee. We've got the vetting process in place with Phase 1, Phase 2. As you know, that there are not just decades and decades of experience with these kinds of projects, but several hundred years. I kind of tried to add it up. And this is not a giveaway. This is an investment in downtown. So what's happening now is that that property, let's just talk about the Heinz. It's only bringing in $12,318 per year in property taxes. So, and that's where we are with it 80% unoccupied. So if we can get that assessment up to $6 million with redevelopment, that's $52,000 plus per year. $8 million, $70,000 plus per year. So you can see that over time you will actually recoup and make this money back up. So the intent is for that money to be recaptured by the city. So there was some discussion about why not just have the city purchase the property and turn it into an arts center. We totally want to look at every qualified proposal that comes in for this project, if it can move forward. And I do want to say for a project with 40,000 square feet, this would be a very big art space, live, work project. In 98 in downtown Portland, they looked at they did a project that was 65,000 square feet. So in comparison, in 1998, Portland had 8+ times population that Cheyenne has now. So it's like, is that the right scale project? I don't know, but I think it needs to be looked at. That said, DDA is absolutely committed to working with Art Cheyenne, the arts community, to help move that piece forward. In closing, we hope the council moves forward with this resolution, for without it, this project will not go, without this investment. And how many more years will buildings languish? Will vacancies be there without intervention? So I think the timing's right, the expertise is right, the partners are right, we're ready to go. We have a great plan that has belts and suspenders hooked to it so that if we don't get the right development proposal that the city and DDA and committees agree on, the monies aren't expended. We're not just throwing monies out willy-nilly. It's a very careful, vetted process and project. So again, thank you for your time. Thank you for your support. And we hope to move this forward. I also do have a letter of support from Leeds, the owner of the Hole on the project. So thank you.
Thank you. Are there questions for Ms. Duggar?
Madam Mayor, through you to Mrs. Duggar. Just a few questions. Just out of curiosity, I'm just curious, what was the process used with which to develop the RFP? Because I could certainly see I mean, part of me does certainly see that this is very developer driven, and I guess what I'm really getting at is wanting to know the process that was used to develop the RFP, and then also really what kind of local stakeholder input was given when the RFP was developed, such as other current business owners or other folks that maybe have been in downtown, or whether it's been a long time or a short time or whatever, but you know, they're going to know what works, what doesn't work, you know, what's going to attach in Cheyenne, you know, in downtown Cheyenne. So I'm just curious really what that process was and what the input was that was solicited from those folks, or if they've been a part of that. And then the other question I have, and I'll just go ahead and ask it now, and you can respond to both. The other question I had is just if you could flesh out for me the process that will be set up in place as far as the evaluation of the RFPs, the RFQs, and who will be a part of that process. Again, that evaluation, will it just be your group, or what is the vision for the cross-section of people that will be involved in that?
Madam Mayor, through you, Councilman Cook, thank you for that question. So the RFP is still in draft format. We have not, it's been largely an internal process. That what the committee has done is collect sample RFPs from other similar type mixed-use redevelopment projects. So we haven't put it out on the street yet because there's no reason to until this piece moves forward. Once this piece moves forward, then we will be in close contact with the city, with other stakeholders to, you know, if we need to hone that, which I'm guessing we might, but we'll see. We're absolutely open to that. So the process for what the proposed development is in the RFP, that's left absolutely open for the upper floors. And for the ground floor, we are saying we want the traditional downtown use. So is it retail? Is it galleries? Is it we don't know. But it will fit within that type of business, downtown business, that generates pedestrian traffic and helps and sales. So it's going to have that. So that is called out in the draft RFP that it must have this, leaving it up to the developer to say what they see will work best from their proposal point of view. So hopefully we'll get different proposals with different options and ideas, and then look at that. What's the strength of those? Is that a good fit? So that's kind of the RFQ. Does that answer your question as to how the RFP was developed?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're not in the RFP. We're not outlining the programmatic plan of work except for ground floor.
Okay.
So that's up. So once we get through the RFQ process, vetted by the technical committee, the people who float to the top, developers who are chosen to come in and do a proposal, they will be required to come on site, have a tour, meet with the tenants, talk to them, look at the building, and then we'll have a pre-submission meeting that they must attend. So, you know, they have to be on the ground really talking to tenants, looking at downtown, see what the mixes are. They'll have already done a lot of that, but they need to be in front of us as a group. So, and what was your second?
Thank you. My second question, Mayor, through you, was just simply what would the makeup of that evaluation committee be? Are we talking just your board, other business members, city council members, leads? Just what is the cross section of people going to be that is evaluating the RFPs?
All right. I brought this little piece of paper, the plan up here, Madam Mayor, through you. So an extensive review and vetting process that I kind of talked about. So phase one of the vetting would be for qualifications. And so that would include a special technical review committee. And so who we're suggesting be on this, and this is, we're absolutely open to additions and comments. Technical Review Committee, Councilors Roybal and White, who are co-sponsors of the resolution. We're suggesting Mayor Orr's Chief of Staff. We hadn't talked to you about that yet. Planning Director, we're mad at Robert for leaving. City Engineer, Commercial Banker, Commercial Realtor, Commercial Appraiser, a Real Estate Economist, the H2 Project Committee, and then the DDA Executive Committee. So that's the phase one that would look at the technical aspect of, do they have the capacity, the history to be able to do this project? Now, on phase two, looking at the proposals that come in, that would be that phase one technical committee, plus the community review committee, who were suggesting, in addition to the tech committee, Mayor Orr. If there's no conflict of interest, we'd like to have a representative of leads that we'd need to really think about that. Chamber, Visit Cheyenne, excuse me, Historic Preservation, downtown property owner, other downtown stakeholders. So again, probably MPO. So again, we're open, but this absolutely would be a community, vetted going through the process.
That's all I had, Mayor.
Thank you.
Ms.
Other questions?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Johnson.
Okay. The first one is, and this was a follow-up that came, a question that was addressed during the Planning Commission, is how the building's going to be marketed at its current price, or is the marketing strategy to do it with the advertised with the city incentive, since it's currently still out on the real estate sites as commercial property? Exactly, is it going to be pulled down off of those sites and revamped with new language when it goes back out for sale? Or since the DDA, as was stated by some of the real estate community, takes on the role of now the realtor, exactly how does this process on this pulling it off the sites and marketing and advertising with the city incentive going to play out?
Madam Mayor, through you. Councilor Johnson, I am not sure exactly when the current commercial contract on that property for the sales contract on that property lapses, but in the meantime, we do have a signed letter from the listing realtor on that property that if that piece of property sells through this process only, he will not collect any sales commission. So in answer to your question, the $750,000 would not come off the price of the property. That will have to, the developer will have to give us a plan that demonstrates that it's of public benefit and how that's going to work. So we envision, and again, we have draft options in place. We don't have anything signed because this is the key piece. We must have this to move forward. So I don't want to just talk about what that price is right now, but it's not like that $750 won't be taken off the price.
Okay.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, and then, sorry, I should have told you I had 4, so you were going to be up here for a second. Okay, and then to address what Mr. Volk came up and spoke in regards to his $0 value on the building, when was the last appraisal done? And I'm basically addressing not the purchasing price that's been posted, but what did the actual last appraisal for this property come out as?
I'm not sure what the last appraised value. I will tell you the assessed value is 1.4 plus.
Okay. And then the third question, basically, how does the incentive offset the massive loss in tax credits given the new boundaries of economic opportunity zones? Because what we looked at with the Wyoming Business Council is some of it didn't appear that the downtown they were no longer in the economic opportunity zones, and so therefore, how does this offset, or the incentive offset those?
I don't have, Madam Mayor, through you, I don't have the exact numbers for that, but you're exactly right. Like, downtown doesn't qualify even for New Markets tax credits. Like, I have looked at every type of tool out there to help figure out how to make this project go. This will help make the numbers work from a developer's point of view.
Okay, and then the last question, and this is basically from the community at large. What is the current owner putting forth into this project?
Madam Mayor, through you. The current owner is upside down and underwater on this project. And I heard a lot of people say, well, just let him drown, don't throw him a lifeline. And it's not that a lifeline has been thrown. The issue is that for over 3 decades, this building has been 80% underutilized, and has just the lack of property tax coming in has been astounding. Like, you've lost over $520,000 in property tax had this building even been at $6 million. So how it will work is that DDA will take transferable options. DDA is not purchasing the properties. And then we'll go through this very extensive phase 1, phase 2 vetting process. Once the developer is selected through this process, then they will exercise the options and purchase the property. And then we move on from there.
Okay. I'll save the rest of my comments until actually we have a motion. Okay. Thank you.
Other comment or other questions? Okay, hearing none. Thank you. Mr. West.
I thought, and I do respect John Volk.
I'm sorry, if you could introduce yourself just one more time.
My name is Chuck West. I spoke earlier. I do respect John Volk. He probably is the only person in town that has as many years of real estate experience that I do. But John is primarily a Cheyenne residential home builder. I have worked for a county as real estate director that's 6 times the size of Wyoming. And we did RFPs all the time, similar to this, much more complicated. So to come out and say no one will respond is frankly, with all due deference, a ridiculous statement. And this is the minimum investment the DDA can make to get whatever experience or developers are out there. It's a relatively small cost. If nothing comes in, the cost is relatively small. If something comes in, the benefits are relatively large, and the $750 that you're considering doesn't get paid until the developer is overly committed with the development agreement and exercises the options to buy these properties. So those people that think the council is throwing away $750, it's just a ludicrous statement. It's not the case. The other thing that some people miss, and I understand how they miss it, took me years to get this, that DDAs nationally, and Title 15 gives the same power here to the Cheyenne DDA, they're created exactly for this type of situation. We as individuals want to buy low and sell high, but a DDA is actually empowered to do just the opposite if it means getting something going that hasn't been going for 35 years. If the private sector was going to do this, they would have done it. So absent city and DDA involvement, these properties will just sit there. And I don't think the general populace wants to see that. I know it's hard to get numbers that show what the actual benefit is to the city by what tax revenue comes in because of this. But there is a benefit that Vicki has pointed out. And the last thing I want to say, is that the tax assessor and John Volk differ by 1.5 million. John thinks it's worth $1. He should go and work with David Hatch to get the value lowered to $1. We have an elected official that knows what he's doing, and I think the value is in the ballpark of what it's worth. And through you, Madam Mayor, if I may further expand on Councilman Johnson's question, the DDA, it's public record, it empowered Vicky to negotiate these options if the city passed this resolution. And they gave her an upper bound of $2 million on the Heinz building. It could be less than that. And in the process, we're also negotiating with the note holder. If something happens by the end of the year, he's going to give an additional $100,000 deduction on that price that doesn't go to David Hatch, but comes directly off the option price to the benefit of the DDA and the ultimate developer. I'm here to answer any other real estate related questions.
Questions for Mr. West? Thank you. Good evening.
Good evening. Brian Terrell, 2142 West Lincoln Way. I'm not a real estate appraiser. I do know that when you buy something, you buy it for what you think it's worth. I've lived in Cheyenne my whole life. Next year, the Heinz building will have been pretty much vacant for 40 years. What's the time frame that we're going to do that we're going to be able to see some growth there? What's the time frame? It's been 14 years since we've seen the whole developed because of the city of Cheyenne. It was because of the fire, but the city created the whole. What's the time frame? The $750,000 is going to sit in an escrow, right? I'm assuming. Are we putting that into the DDA? What are we doing with the $750?
Mr. Chair, nothing will be expended until there's a project. It will be in our city coffer funds drawing interest.
Okay. Once again, 40 years that building sat empty. We have a saying in the car business. You can put perfume on a pig, you still have a pig. To get it to $8 million in assessed value, you better be ready to start spending money on adding floors. It's about $1 million a floor. So at best case scenario, the way it sits now is $4 million. Best case scenario. It ain't gonna change, and that's, I'm talking the very top. That building has a lot of limitations. Plumbing is old. Windows. Concrete. Steel. The best thing for that building, and I love Cheyenne, I'd hate to see us lose something, is probably to raise that building. That's it. Any questions?
Thank you. Questions for Mr. Terrell?
John Voken, Chuck, thanks very much for what you said. That was great. I have had commercial experience than you might think, but that's okay. We'll. I still haven't heard, and I'm the DDA. First of all, Mr. Hatch owns the building. He's in default. He's upside down. Steamboat note holder, mortgage holder. For all practical purposes, the owner. And you're going to go out, let's just say that this passes and then the DDA goes out, and Mr. Johnson was alluding to it. What is the price that you're going to put on the building? And Mr. West would certainly agree with me. The worst thing anybody can do if they're going to try to market a piece of property is say, what's the price? I don't know. Name a price. How the hell can you sell something if you don't know what the price is? You're gonna wait for somebody else to price your horse? I mean, you're not going to get anybody to get into that kind of a situation. That's the, you have to have a price on the horse. So what is the price? The DDA has got your support. I was on the DDA board. I was on the Joint Powers Board. I was on the chairman of the DDA. So Chuck, before you ever saw Cheyenne, some of us have some roots here. So I've been here. I know what's going on. So, what's the price? What is the price? Can anybody $750,000? However you're going to put it, you're going to pass this, and then the DDA is going to go out on this national search, and you're going to get hopefully somebody to come in. But the first question, someone on the phone, they call you up and say, "What's the price on the building?" What the hell are you going to tell them? You can't just say, and if you say $2 million, you think that's realistic? Hasn't gotten anywhere so far. So, as far as I'm concerned, where you should be negotiating is with the note holder to come up with who owns the whole right now? Is it Leeds?
Leeds owns both.
Thank you. I thought it was Leeds. So Leeds has to be a party to the whole contract. But you almost got to have a listing contract. And Mr. West would certainly agree with me that. So if you have a listing contract that states out what is the price of my land and building, and then you start from there. If you don't start with that, you're just, throwing feathers in the air. And one other thing I wanted to answer back, I forgot to, when you get up here and speak, and then you sit down, you always forget what you thought you wanted to say. One of the things you said on Christensen was, Mayor Pando did also acknowledge that the current value on Venture Drive and the BOPU was $1.6 million back in about 1998 that we gave the city. And everybody, maybe I'll forget that, but that's what did happen. So I have a vested interest in Cheyenne. I'm born and raised here, 6 generations. So, I'm not some Johnny come lately.
Thank you, Mr. Polk. Questions for Mr. Polk? All right. Further public comment. I have forgotten where we're even at. Clerk, can you please?
That's where we are, Mayor.
We don't even know where we're at. No, we're on public comment. We're finishing a public comment, and this is Finance Committee, Mr. White.
Madam Mayor, the recommendation from the Finance Committee is to adopt, and I so move.
Second.
Moved by Mr. White, seconded by Mr. Roybal. Now discussion by council.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. White.
I move to amend by substitute dated July 2nd, 2018.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded by Mr. Luna. The amendment.
Madam Mayor, the substitute provides for clerical clarifications. It renumbers number 2 to number 3 under the now therefore be it resolved clause, adding a new number 2 to read as follows. 2. Provide the $750,000 for the project only upon governing body review and approval of the proposed development plan.
Discussion by the public on the amendment.
Vicki Duggar, DGA. We support this amendment and are happy with this amendment.
Okay, thank you. Further discussion of the amendment? Discussion of the amendment by council?
Madam Mayor.
Dr. Rennie.
I just want to make sure I'm working with the right copy. What we had in our packet was dated June 6th. Did I read that correctly? And Mr. White's, is that what we have, what we received in our email?
Yes.
What I have is dated June 25th. And what day did you?
Well, it was amended at Finance on July 2nd. And so what was sent out was the revised copy, including that amended language after July 2nd.
Okay. The clerk has been kind enough to provide me with a copy of it, so thank you.
Okay, further discussion by council on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment, please signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye.
Those opposed. That amendment passes. We are back on the main motion. Further discussion by council?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Johnson.
Okay, after listening to all the dialogue and communications and everything, as well as the lovely written newspaper article this morning, and that's where I will start. When all of you in attendance have a vested interest in this community, I thought Austin's take on this was very unique in showing that the community at large, not encompassing the people in this room, actually have no idea what the Heinz building even is. The fact that I literally read his article about the big white one just made me think of an airplane reference when they described what airplane it was in the air. And it's a giant white plane. To make it in such simplistic terms showed that literally the community at large that we are accused of not listening to doesn't know what we're talking about to begin with. And he drafted the language as such to literally point that out. Speaking with other individuals, the reason I am still in support of this is because of the way that things have transpired over the last 40 years. We've heard from developers and realtors and everybody else telling us that this is going to fail. And maybe it is time to look at it from a different point of view and a pair of outside eyes. That's why I supported this. When I met with Vicki at the DDA and talked with Robert Briggs, I said, the reason I support this is because you two have the background looking at, not through rose-colored glasses, but at least come with the knowledge. Robert, working through Sheridan, understood, what the Wyoming Business Council, the state constitution, as well as state statutes entailed. And then with Vicki's experience in Oregon and New Mexico, I thought that these two individuals would actually bring forth some new, different ideas that maybe some of us just got a little jaded of hearing or looking at a feature that had not been occupied, 80% not occupied for the last 40 years. Going into, some of the background as to what the DDA is kind of looking for as far as stakeholders. Just in the examples that have been given tonight, we've heard about art space. We all know that a hotel was once brought up there, LCCC dorms, lofts, studios, office space, restaurants, groceries, and even a museum, which I didn't know that. I didn't pay attention when I was in high school that a transportation museum was going into the Heinz, so forgive me for my ignorance. I was more focused on skateboarding. So with that going in, why can't we look at every avenue, including all the ones that were brought forward? We are creating a new canvas for this building, and maybe we should look at all options. It doesn't necessarily have to be office space, and just as Susanna gave a brief explanation on mixed use, why does it have to be limited to one specific facet instead of just an all or nothing? When I met this afternoon with the artists in residence at the Heinz, I told them I've toured this building 4 times and looked at, ghost signs of dentist's office and attorney's offices. I believe our own city attorney at one time had an office in that building, and just looking at the ghost signs of how this office space was used in the past. Going into the whole, I've always explained to this on my post that the whole and the Heinz have a symbiotic relationship. You can't do one without the other, whether that be through geothermal, HVAC, like has been stated as far as low ceilings and air conditioning that has obviously been reviewed for 30 years. This is obviously going to have to take an outside approach where both entities are going to have to be involved in order to make this work. The thing with lights on that was brought up, when I asked what lights on was when I first started attending the Fridays in the Heinz, I was told it was exactly that. Lights on was created to show that the lights were actually on in the building. It was an enticement to actually showcase that, this building could actually be used, and it was to draw attention for this exact purpose, to entice economic development and to entice individuals to come into our community, whether they're outside of the community or local, if they wanted to take this on, but the lights were in fact on. On several of my projects that I've worked on, I live by a motto that there's basically 2 things that can kill any project, and that is ego and money. And so you always have to ask yourself of why you take on a project. The projects that you do for just a job don't really matter to you if it's just a job. I've taken on so many projects that I've burned myself out, but I put my heart into my work of what I do, and that's why I succeed. And so basically, you have to ask yourself, as a stakeholder, what is it that you gain out of this? Are you doing it for greed? Are you doing it for Cheyenne's downtown? Are you doing it for our community of a whole? What are your actual purposes of doing the project that you've been assigned to? And so basically with that, I would hope that everybody actually that has any vested interest in this building and its development going forward actually works with a little more heart and commitment, and not just because it was a job duty that was assigned to them, or that they actually hope that they could make some kind of money out of a deal. So with that, thank you.
Thank you. Is there further discussion by council?
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Roybal.
This kind of started out as my idea. I was sitting in the Depot Plaza freezing my butt off in February, having a latte, and I was looking at the buildings, the Heinz building, and then we had some stuff come across our desks where the leads finally had both sides of the hole, so they owned the whole hole. So, and then we had Vicky come on, we had Robert come on. It just seemed like the perfect storm. Everything was lining up there so that we could maybe put something together with this. So I met with my fellow Ward 1 colleagues, and then we got together with Leeds, and we got together with the West. Then we pulled in DDA, and everybody kept stacking bricks on top of this thing, so it looked like it was going to work. I still think it's going to work. You know, we've heard from several local builders that they looked at the Heinz building 30 years ago, and they all said, "Oh, this will never work." 30 years ago, I was carrying a bag phone to the auction when I went down to buy cars. Now I can run the space shuttle with this thing. Okay, things change in 30 years, and I'm thinking that perhaps we've got maybe some new technology that we can go in and do, some new ideas. But I want to hear from some other people than the ones that just said it won't work. So if we send it out, if nothing happens, then nothing happens. We don't lose $750,000. We just lose a chance. So that was my reasoning behind it. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion by council. President Rennie.
Madam Mayor, a couple of years ago when it looked like Mr. Hatch was getting really close to pulling this whole thing together and having it work, one of the main problems was still the lack of parking. And we'd been approached by Leeds, the chamber, the DDA, if we would commit to putting parking in the hole so that this could all come together and work out. And we made that commitment a couple of years ago to the tune of about this amount, $750,000. And so we've all kind of, those of us that have been up here have known that that money was sitting there and somewhat earmarked if anything, if Mr. Hatch could have pulled it off. And we did have a deadline on that, and that deadline has passed. So the DDA is asking us to renew our commitment. And I think that to kind of follow up on the councilman from Ward 1, and I guess in response to people to say if we approve this, we're not listening, I talked to a lot of people, and many people have come to the conclusion that there are some buildings in the downtown that just aren't going to be developed, and nothing's going to happen there unless somehow we get involved to some extent. And the Heinz is one of those buildings. And I think the proof is in the pudding. I mean, people have said, well, don't bring anybody in from out of town. But I look around, you know, some of you people, I mean, it has been over 30 years. And everybody, again, my perception is the same as Mr. Roybal's. If somebody here in town thought this could be pulled off and could be done and make some money out of it, they would have done it by now. I haven't seen that happen, and there hasn't been any movement. So if we're going to do something, like as I said, I think there are many people in the community that, at least when they talk to me, have come to the conclusion that if we're going to do something in downtown and make some progress, government, city, county, somebody's going to have to get involved. So I guess to answer a couple more comments, you know, one of the audience members said, you don't have to do anything with the Heinz, it's not going anywhere. Well, no, it hasn't gone anywhere for 30 plus years. And if we don't do anything, it's not going to go anywhere until it falls in. And the other part is that, you know, we've been accused with this, the way I perceive our use of this monies is that if the DDA comes up with a viable alternative, whether it be a local developer or an out-of-town developer, and it is viable, and there's one part of it, whether it be redoing windows or whatever, that if we can contribute to it, that will make this a go and get more people downtown, whether it be living downtown, employed downtown, whatever, it's worth it. It's worth our risk. And in the long run, with the improvement in sales or property tax values, I do think that we will eventually earn it back. So I look at this as we're not bailing out the owner of the Heinz. We're bailing out downtown, and it's going to have to be done one step at a time, but we have to take a step. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion by council?
Madam Mayor.
Mr. White.
Well, lots been said that I was going to say, but I will just point out that a couple of years ago, this governing body clearly articulated to the DDA at that time that we wanted them to change its mission. Specifically, we wanted them to become more active in property and economic development. Stated that. So fast forward to today. Engaging or supporting this resolution will help the DDA fulfill the mission that we articulated. And then the DDA, once they heard that direction from us, they went through a thorough and exhaustive strategic planning process led by Mr. Galeotis. And strategic plan number 4, aiding downtown buildings, specifically abandoned or unused buildings. That was one of the points on their strategic plan. So the fact that DDA is engaging in this with us, or is asking us to support them in this effort, is basically doing what we told them to do. The second thing I wanted to point out was that we can talk till we're blue in the face about all of the proposed projects, ideas, what have you, over the last 35 years that have failed. Yep, they failed. We need to learn from them. We need to look forward. Because looking forward and having vision, I truly believe, is in our community's DNA. When Union Pacific basically built this town, we weren't referred to the Magic City on the plains because we were afraid. We had innovation. We had strong ideas. We developed gas-powered lamps. We developed electric street lamps. We developed the trolley system. We were the wealthiest city per capita in 1882. A lot of people forget that. And so I think really looking forward and having a vision is in our DNA. And this, yep, it's never been done before. But this, I truly believe, is the most forward-looking, comprehensive, engaging plan that's ever come forth since the Heinz has been vacated over the last almost 4 decades now. And so one of the things when I ran 2 years ago, I got asked more than any other question, and I tell this story a lot, and I still get asked about it weekly, if not daily. What are you going to do about the Heinz, and what are you going to do about the hole? Well, now I have a plan to tell those people, to give an answer, and what I think is an effective answer and a response that shows we are willing to try. We're still willing to try. So I'll just close by saying that with regard to the H2 project, it's my sincere conviction that it certainly is better to make this effort and try this than to not try at all. And if we fail, we fail? What have we lost? A building sits empty. A hole sits unfilled. Things that have been taking place for decades. And I don't want that to continue for decades more. So if we fail, then at least we failed while trying to be bold and while trying to dare something greatly. And that's how I feel about it. That's why I signed on to it. Thank you.
Thank you. Further discussion by council.
Madam Mayor.
Mr. Case.
Originally, this was not a tough one for me. It just made sense. I've heard a lot of different arguments tonight. And let me just start out by saying that I still am going to support this on the basis that our risk-reward ratio really is pretty low, because if the DDA goes out and recruits a developer that wants to come in and take this project on, the return could be fantastic for downtown. However, the risk, if nobody comes to the table with a bid, is zero. We'll still have our $750K. And I think that part of the problem here with how the community is digesting this is it really a convergence of capitalism and government, and where should those lines cease to blur? And I'll reiterate my colleague, Mr. White's point. If we don't try, if we don't give this a shot, I think we're just giving up on downtown. And if we give it a shot and we fail, well, we're still going to have our $750K, and we're still going to have an albatross downtown that needs to be dealt with by some future council. So I hear the arguments. I understand what you're saying, but without a public-private partnership, it's clear that nothing's going to happen with those two properties. And unless somebody in the audience or that perhaps reads the paper tomorrow is willing to ante up the cost to purchase that building, which leads me to I didn't get that. I should have asked this earlier. What is the listing price of the building, and how's that going to unfold in this process? So if anybody can answer that would be great, and if not, perhaps text me. So, Mr. West,
Mr. West was raising his hand.
Thank you, Chuck West, through you, Mayor. Answer to Mr. Case's question. The listed price is $2.2 million. Vicky has been authorized by the DDA board to negotiate, if the council approves this resolution, for an option price of $2 million or less. David Hatch, as you know, has got a substantial amount of debt. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's close to $1.9 million. So it's not like he's achieving some big gain out of this. So we hope to, with the discount the lender is offering of $100,000 for an early payoff before the end of the year, to get that price down to 1.9 or less. Leeds has a different price on the whole of $400,000. Leeds is sort of works like the DDA. They, what they lose to the price, they lose in their programs that they are responsible for. So the way the option works, I can't speak for David Hatch. I do know that his current listing expires in August. Once the option is negotiated and recorded, even if David Hatch sold the building, the option is still effective as against the new purchaser. I think it's highly unlikely that he can sell the building for anywhere near $2.2 million. Miracles do happen. Someone wins the lotto and decides they want to buy the Heinz. But the option, once executed, is a protected document. It's a real estate interest. So whether the developer that gets the option through the assignment, he can still exercise that against whoever owns the building. I don't know if that answers your question.
Thank you. I think it does.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Further discussion by council. Further discussion by council. All right. All those in favor of this resolution, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? Motion passes.
Next item is number 20G on page 5, contract between the City of Cheyenne and Paycom Incorporated to outsource employee payroll and provide software for core human resource functionality.
Thank you. Mr. Downey, let you explain this one. We'll start with you. Thank you.
Mayor Ron Downey, City Treasurer. Before us is a contract between Paycom and the City of Cheyenne to outsource probably about 85 to 90% of our timekeeping and payroll process. This will be a cloud-based product where the employees will punch in, punch out daily. Supervisors will automatically approve the time cards weekly, and then once that process happens, it flows into the system and is ready for pay. So this process, it takes a lot of the liability away from the city as far as W-2 941 processing, the year-end ACA 1095 processing. It puts that liability onto Paycom. They take that liability for us, and they also take the liability for garnishment and child support garnishments also. So what this would do, it would actually reduce my staff by 1, and those cost savings will basically cover the cost of the annual contract, along with we wouldn't be paying for the payroll and HR system we currently have, along with a couple of other pieces of software that the HR office currently is paying for but does not fully utilize. So along with those 3 to 4 items, this will be a budget neutral item, but it offloads a lot of the liability from the city to Paycom for us. So with that, I would respectfully request that the council approve this contract.
Any questions for Mr. Downey? Any questions for Mrs. Downey? Okay, hearing none. Thank you. Other further comments by the public? Comments by the public? Hearing none. Mr. White.
Madam Mayor, the recommendation from the Finance Committee is to approve, and I so move.
Second.
Moved by Mr. White, seconded by Mr. Case. Discussion by council?
Yes, ma'am.
Mr. Johnson.
The only reason I voted no during finance is because we had to pull out calculators to find out which numbers we were dealing with, since I was 27,000 and then 10,000 monthly. And so when I got my original language where it said, usually everything said contract not to exceed X dollars, but then when we were having to figure it out at the table there and nobody really could figure out, we kind of got a ballpark but not something specific. And so my no was basically on the technicality of exact dollar amounts that we were putting forward on the contract.
Thank you.
Mayor, through you to Mr. Johnson. Yeah, that is correct. There is a setup fee. That's the $27,000. And then after that, it's a monthly fee based on the number of employees that we're actually paying each month. So over the last year and a half, we've averaged about 775 employees per month through part-time and full-time employees. So the numbers in front of you are actually a little bit high. It's based on a number of 800 employees per month. So.
Okay, any other comments by council? Further comments by council? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed? That motion passes. We're going to take a 5-minute break.
Oh, thank you.